"She's too fat to be my mail-order bride," rich rancher declared, but his mountain brother said she "es perfect for me." The train screeched into the small station of Silver Creek, steam rolling across the wooden platform. From its carriages stepped Rosalie Murphy, a woman with round cheeks, soft eyes, and a body fuller than most. In her trembling hands, she clutched a placard that read, "Ward Ranch." This was her one chance at a new life, the promise of marriage to a wealthy rancher she had been corresponding with for months. She had sold nearly everything to pay for the journey, but as Harrison Ward, the wealthy and polished owner of Ward Ranch, strode forward, his face hardened. His tailored coat and gold pocket watch marked him as a man of means, but his words cut sharper than any blade. "This is a mistake," he spat loudly enough for every curious onlooker to hear. "You are too fat to be my wife. I won't shackle myself to this." He gestured at her with disdain. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some whispered, others pointed. Children giggled. Rosalie's face burned, her eyes filling with tears, but she forced herself to stand tall, refusing to collapse beneath their ridicule. Her dream was crumbling in public view. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the platform, another figure stepped forward. Broader, rougher, scarred by war, Caleb Ward Harrison's elder brother emerged. Unlike Harrison's Polish, Caleb carried the aura of mountain solitude, his beard thick, his hands calloused. He had lived apart from society for years, haunted by wounds both visible and unseen. Now he fixed his gaze on Rosalie, his voice deep and steady. "My brother may be blind to true beauty," he declared, his words silencing the crowd, "but I am not. If she has come all this way to be a bride, then let her be mine." Gasps rippled across the station. Harrison's jaw clenched. Rosalie's tears froze in astonishment, and the town held its breath, waiting for her answer. The murmurs at Silver Creek's train station did not fade quickly. The townsfolk craned their necks to see what would happen next. Curiosity mingled with the cruelty of gossip. Rosalie stood frozen, her valise trembling in her hands, cheeks burning under their scrutiny. She had imagined this day so differently, meeting a husband who had written kind words, who had promised security and affection. Instead, she found herself ridiculed for the body she had never been able to change. Rosalie had always been the large girl back east. Suitors had ignored her. Employers had mocked her stamina. But she had worked hard, saved every penny, and answered the advertisement from Harrison Ward. His letters had painted a picture of respectability and prosperity. A fine ranch, a large house, and a gentleman seeking a wife to share his success. She thought she had been chosen for her gentleness, her skill with cooking, her capacity for loyalty. Now, in front of strangers, Harrison stripped her of every shred of dignity with one cruel declaration. Harrison himself stood tall and immaculate, his hair slicked back, his boots polished to a shine. His words dripped with the arrogance of a man who had always been obeyed. He did not lower his voice. If anything, he raised it, ensuring that all could hear his rejection. "This woman is not fit for me. I require grace, refinement, and beauty. She is unsightly." The crowd tittered nervously. Some averted their eyes, others smirked outright. And then there was Caleb. He had not planned to come into town that day. A recluse since the war, he rarely ventured down from the pine-clad slopes where his cabin stood. His face carried scars from shrapnel, and his gait still bore the stiffness of old wounds. People whispered about him, too, about his solitude, his temper, the shadows that clung to him. But Caleb had learned to ignore the whispers. He had carved out a life in the mountains, a life of wood-cutting, hunting, and silence. Yet when he saw the cruelty unfolding on the platform, something stirred in him. He remembered too well what it felt like to be dismissed as broken, unwanted, an object of pity or scorn. His gaze settled on Rosalie, not on the roundness of her figure or the tears at the corners of her eyes, but on the quiet strength in the way she refused to collapse, on the dignity she still tried to hold. He stepped forward, boots thudding against the planks. The crowd parted instinctively. Where Harrison's arrogance was sharp and cold, Caleb's presence was heavy and immovable, like a mountain looming on the horizon. He addressed Harrison first, voice steady, but filled with quiet contempt. "You speak of refinement and beauty," Caleb said, "but all I see is cruelty. You shame her for flesh, while your own soul is gaunt." Harrison flushed crimson, his jaw tightening, but Caleb did not pause. He turned to Rosalie, softening his tone. "You came here for a husband. My brother has proven himself unworthy, but I will not stand by while you are humiliated. If you will have me, I will take you as my wife." The platform went utterly silent. Rosalie's lips parted, trembling with disbelief. She had never expected rescue, least of all from the man the town whispered about as a scarred hermit. Yet there was no mockery in his eyes, only sincerity. The station clock struck the hour, its chime ringing through the stillness. Rosalie looked once at Harrison's sneer, then back at Caleb's solemn face. Her voice shook, but it carried. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." The die was cast, and Silver Creek, so fond of gossip, had just found the story it would tell for years. The wedding had been swift, little more than vows exchanged beneath the low rafters of the town's small church. Rosalie's heart pounded as she repeated words that bound her not to the man she had expected, but to his scarred and quiet brother. When the minister spoke the final blessing, Caleb offered his arm. His hand was calloused, warm and steady. She accepted, though her thoughts swirled like leaves in a storm. That evening, as twilight painted the sky, Caleb prepared 2 sturdy horses at the edge of town. One was a towering bay mare he saddled for himself. The other, a gentle sorrel, carried not only Rosalie but also her modest belongings. He adjusted the stirrups low and padded the saddle with extra blankets. "She's steady-footed," he said gruffly, noticing her nervous glance. "She won't throw you." Rosalie had never been much of a rider. Her size had often drawn ridicule whenever she tried, but Caleb's tone held no mockery, only quiet reassurance. With his large hand bracing her elbow, she mounted the sorrel. To her surprise, the animal did not balk. They rode out of Silver Creek beneath a sky thick with stars. The murmurs of the townsfolk faded into the distance, replaced by the chorus of crickets and the rush of the nearby river. Caleb rode a little ahead, his broad shoulders outlined against the moonlight. Rosalie followed, her mind torn between fear of the unknown and a fragile thread of hope. The trail wound upward into the foothills. Pine trees thickened on either side, their resinous scent sharp in the cool night air. The path grew steeper, rocks crunching beneath the horses' hooves. Rosalie shifted uncomfortably, her body aching with each jolt. She worried she might slow him down, that he would regret his impulsive choice. At last, she spoke hesitantly. "You needn't feel obliged, Caleb. I know. This marriage was not what you planned." He glanced back, the scar on his cheek catching the moonlight. "Obligation had nothing to do with it," he said simply. "I saw cruelty, and I could not abide it. I saw you." Her breath caught at those last words, though she said nothing. Hours passed. At one point, Caleb halted and dismounted, motioning for her to do the same. They built a small campfire beneath a rocky overhang. From his pack, he produced a tin pot and some dried venison. Soon, the smell of stew filled the air. Rosalie, chilled and weary, held her hands over the flames. When he handed her the first bowl, she blinked. "You'll eat later?" "You eat first," he said firmly. "You've had a harder day than I." No man had ever put her needs before his. Tears stung her eyes as she accepted the bowl. She sipped the broth, rich and smoky, and for the first time since stepping off the train, warmth began to seep into her heart. Later, as she lay on a bed of pine boughs Caleb had arranged, wrapped in his spare blanket, she heard him shifting nearby, keeping the fire alive. The mountains were silent, except for the wind sighing through the pines. She whispered into the darkness, unsure if he would hear, "Thank you for not turning away." He did not answer at once. Then his low voice came, steady as the earth itself. "I know what it is to be judged by scars the world can't see past. You deserve better than that." The journey stretched for 2 more days. They crossed narrow ridges where eagles wheeled overhead, forded icy streams that numbed Rosalie's feet, and rode through meadows where wildflowers nodded in the breeze. Each hardship was met with Caleb's quiet strength, his steady hand when she slipped, his spare coat draped over her shoulders, his rare but genuine half-smile when she dared to hum a tune to ease her nerves. By the time the cabin appeared, tucked against a mountainside and wreathed in wood smoke, Rosalie was exhausted. Yet she felt a flicker of belonging, as though every mile had carried her further from humiliation and closer to something she had never known, the possibility of being wanted. Caleb swung down from his horse and offered his hand. "Welcome home," he said. His eyes held no pity, only certainty. For the first time, Rosalie allowed herself to believe she might truly have found one. The cabin stood sturdily against the mountainside, built of hand-hewn logs darkened by time. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and the scent of pine resin clung to the air. Rosalie paused on the threshold, heart pounding. This would be her home now. Not the fine ranch she had imagined, not the life of ease she had dreamed from Harrison's letters, but something quieter, rawer, and perhaps truer. Inside, the cabin was plain but not unfriendly. A broad hearth dominated one wall, its ashes still warm from Caleb's fire that morning. A rough-hewn table stood nearby, scarred with use. Shelves lined with books and jars of dried herbs surprised her proof that Caleb's life was more than survival. A bedstead of carved pine stood in the corner, neatly made. Caleb shifted uncomfortably as she looked around. "It isn't much," he said, his deep voice betraying a hint of self-consciousness. Rosalie shook her head, touching the smooth grain of the table. "It feels lived in, honest." He busied himself stabling the horses while she unpacked her modest trunk. Her dresses, faded but neatly mended, looked out of place against the rough timbers. She set out a small framed photograph of her late parents and a battered hymnal. It was all she had, but it softened the space. That first evening, she asked if she might cook. Caleb looked surprised but agreed. She pulled flour and lard from his pantry, rolled out dough with clumsy determination, and soon the cabin filled with the scent of biscuits browning over the fire. Caleb ate them with a reverence that startled her. No one's baked bread here since—" He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "They're good. Real good." The warmth in his eyes was better than any praise she had ever known. Days fell into rhythm. At dawn, Caleb split wood outside, while Rosalie stoked the hearth and prepared breakfast eggs when the hens cooperated, porridge when they didn't. She discovered jars of wild honey he had stored away and used them to sweeten their meals. Afterward, she swept the cabin, humming softly. At first, she felt self-conscious, afraid her presence was a burden. But Caleb listened to her songs with quiet appreciation, sometimes even pausing his work outside to stand at the window, unseen, while she sang. In the afternoons, she followed him into the forest. He taught her to identify edible herbs, to listen for the calls of hawks, to tread lightly over moss so as not to disturb deer tracks. When she faltered on the steep paths, he extended his broad hand. His touch was firm, never mocking. One crisp morning, as snow threatened, he showed her how to split kindling. She laughed when the axe jarred her arms, and he stepped behind her, guiding her grip with his calloused hands. For a moment, she felt the strength of him close, the steady rhythm of his breath. She flushed, suddenly aware of how her heart beat faster. That evening, when the wind rattled the shutters, Caleb insisted she take the bed while he slept near the hearth. She protested, but he was immovable. "You're my wife," he said simply. "That means your comfort comes first." The words sank deep, chasing away years of ridicule. No one had ever considered her comfort. She lay awake long after the fire dimmed, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breath from across the room. Little by little, Rosalie blossomed. Her laughter came more easily. Her step grew surer. She began to decorate the cabin with simple touches, sprigs of pine in a jug, a patchwork quilt she pieced together from scraps, a curtain sewn from flour sacks. Caleb, for all his silence, noticed every change. One evening, she sang an old Irish ballad her mother had taught her. Her voice trembled at first, but grew strong, filling the cabin with melancholy beauty. When she finished, Caleb's scarred face was unreadable in the firelight. She feared she had embarrassed herself. But then he said, low and reverent, "It's been years since this cabin heard a song. Thank you." Her throat tightened. She realized she wanted nothing more than to keep filling the silence of his world with warmth. There were moments, too, of unspoken longing, when their hands brushed as they passed plates, when she caught him watching her with an intensity he quickly masked, when she found herself wishing the bed was not so wide and the space between them not so great. Yet neither hurried. Respect and tenderness formed the foundation of their fragile bond. Winter crept down from the peaks. Together they stacked wood high, salted venison, and prepared for the snow. Each task, done side by side, wove another thread into the fabric of their life together. One night, as the first snow fell, Rosalie sat by the fire mending his shirt. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "This cabin, it feels different now, warmer." She smiled, heart swelling. "That's because you've let me make it a home." He didn't answer at once, only reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. The silence between them spoke more than words ever could. In that cabin on the mountain, two wounded souls began to stitch their lives together, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of kindness that slowly built something enduring. Snow had fallen heavy on Silver Creek, blanketing the mountain in silence. Inside Caleb's cabin, The fire burned bright, and Rosalie felt a warmth she had never known. She was learning to belong. But peace on the mountain was fragile like frost that vanished under the first touch of sun. In town, Harrison Ward simmered with fury. His inheritance hung in the balance, and every day Rosalie remained married to Caleb was another day his wealth slipped further from reach. He could not bear the humiliation of being upstaged by his scarred, reclusive brother. Harrison hired a private investigator from Denver to dig into Rosalie's past. "Find me dirt," he ordered coldly. "I don't care what rumors, debts, anything that paints her unworthy." But the investigator returned empty-handed. Rosalie's record was spotless. She had worked as a seamstress, lived modestly, and cared for her sick mother until the end. There was no scandal to exploit. Frustrated, Harrison devised a darker plan. He began whispering to townsfolk in saloons and at church socials. "That woman isn't what she seems," he told them, swirling whiskey in his glass. "She had a husband back east, ran from him, maybe even worse. Caleb deserves to know." The seed of doubt was sown, and rumors spread like wildfire. By the time Caleb and Rosalie came down from the mountain for supplies, whispers followed them through the streets. Women drew their children close. Men cast sidelong glances. Rosalie felt the sting of shame pierce her again, as it had on the train platform. She clutched Caleb's arm, but his jaw was tight. That evening, as they returned to the cabin, Rosalie sensed the change. Caleb was quiet, too quiet. He stared into the fire, his scarred features carved in shadow. Finally, he asked, "Rosalie, is there truth to what they're saying?" Her heart dropped. "What are they saying?" "That you had a husband, that you left him." His voice was steady, but pain hid beneath it. "No," she whispered, shaking her head furiously. "Caleb, I swear, I've never been married. I've never belonged to anyone but you." He searched her eyes, torn between trust and the poison of doubt. For the first time since their wedding, a wall rose between them. The rumors escalated when a stranger arrived in Silver Creek claiming to be Rosalie's abandoned husband. He was tall, smooth-talking, and presented papers to prove his marriage to her. Harrison was quick to play the part of a concerned brother, urging Caleb to do the right thing and let Rosalie return to her supposed husband. Rosalie was devastated. "That man is lying," she cried. "I've never seen him before in my life." But the forged papers, stamped and signed, made her protests seem weak against hard evidence. Caleb's faith wavered. He wanted to believe her. He did believe her. But the weight of appearances pressed heavily on him. "Rosalie," he said one stormy night, voice breaking, "I can't fight the whole town if I'm not certain." Her tears fell freely. "After everything we've built together, you still doubt me?" The silence that followed was the coldest she had ever known. In the end, Caleb told her she should stay in town until things were sorted, his own heart cracking as he forced the words out. She gathered her few belongings, walking out into the snow with the weight of betrayal pressing on her chest. Back in Silver Creek, Harrison feigned sympathy while inwardly reveling in victory. But he had underestimated Rosalie's resolve. Though heartbroken, she refused to accept defeat. With the quiet help of Martha, the widowed midwife, Rosalie began her own investigation. She followed the stranger's movements, pieced together his story, and slowly the cracks began to show. His accent slipped when he drank. He avoided questions about their supposed life together. Martha uncovered the truth in a discarded letter hidden at the saloon. The husband was a down-on-his-luck actor from Denver, hired and paid handsomely by Harrison. The scheme was laid bare. Rosalie held the letter in her trembling hands, a mixture of fury and vindication burning in her chest. She had proof now, proof that Harrison had lied, that Caleb's doubts had been poisoned by his brother's malice, and she would use it. The winter sky was iron gray the day Rosalie decided enough was enough. With Martha's steady hand on her arm and the incriminating letter tucked safe against her breast, she walked to the town hall where the weekly gathering was already underway. Word spread quickly. The scorned bride was here, and she carried something with her. Caleb stood near the back, torn and weary. He had barely slept since sending Rosalie away, his conscience gnawed raw. Harrison lingered near the podium, smug and confident, ready to deliver another poisonous half-truth to the townsfolk. But when Rosalie stepped into the room, chin lifted though her heart raced, the hall fell silent. She faced them all, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You've been told lies about me," she said. "Tonight I will show you the truth." Harrison scoffed loudly. "Why listen to her? She's been deceiving this town since she arrived. Ask her supposed husband." From the corner, the hired actor shifted uneasily. Rosalie's eyes burned into him. "Yes, let's ask him. Ask him what name I called him on our wedding night. Ask him the street we lived on in Boston. Ask him the color of my mother's eyes." The man stammered, searching for answers that weren't there. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Rosalie drew out the letter, the inked words damning in their clarity. Harrison's instructions to the actor, promising payment for his performance. Gasps filled the hall. Caleb's head snapped toward his brother, his scarred face hardening with every word Rosalie read aloud. Harrison lunged forward, desperate. "It's forged! Lies!" But the actor, cornered by the fury of the crowd, broke. His voice cracked. "It's true. He paid me. I've never laid eyes on the woman before that day." The hall erupted. Men shouted. Women shook their heads in disgust. Harrison's empire of lies crumbled beneath him. Rosalie turned then, eyes brimming, searching for Caleb. "I told you the truth," she whispered, though her words carried across the hush that followed. Caleb pushed through the crowd, his chest heaving. He stopped before her, then dropped to his knees on the wooden floorboards. "Forgive me," he said hoarsely. "I doubted you when I should have trusted with my whole soul. I let him poison my mind. But I love you, Rosalie. I love you, and I will never let you stand alone again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She lifted him to his feet, pressing her forehead against his. "Then don't ever send me away again," she whispered. The townsfolk, who once whispered cruelly, now burst into applause, voices rising in support of the couple who had endured lies and betrayal, yet still stood together. Harrison, disgraced, slipped from the hall under a storm of angry jeers. Rosalie and Caleb walked out side by side, hands clasped tight, the snow falling softly around them. For the first time, there was no shame. No doubt, only love made stronger by fire. The cabin glowed with golden firelight, snow whispering against the window panes. Rosalie sat curled beneath a quilt, her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes still shining from the tumult of the town's gathering. Caleb moved about quietly, stoking the fire, setting a kettle to boil, as though the familiar rhythm of home could settle both their hearts. When at last he sat beside her, the silence was thick, but not heavy. He reached for her hand, rough and scarred, yet trembling now with vulnerability. This place, he said softly, glancing around the humble cabin, was only wood and stone until you walked through the door. You've given it warmth. You've given me warmth. Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was steady. I thought I had lost you, Caleb. When you doubted me, I thought my heart would break in two. But even then I couldn't stop loving you. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Never again, he whispered. You're safe here. This is your home now, if you'll still have it. She laughed gently through her tears, pressing her lips to his. It was always home. From the first night you handed me the bowl of stew by the fire, it was home. Outside, the storm deepened, but inside the cabin, the world seemed to narrow to only them, the warmth of the flames, the strength of his arms, the steady beat of two hearts that had chosen each other against all odds. Yet even in the quiet, questions lingered. Would their love be enough to withstand the shadows that might come again? Rosalie only knew one thing with certainty. She was not alone anymore. Stories like Rosalie and Caleb's remind us that love is not about appearances or cruel whispers. It is about seeing one another's worth when no one else will. She was cast aside in humiliation, yet found a man who saw her as perfect, scars and all. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know. Share your town, your country, your story. And if you believe, like I do, that real love is forged through trials and trust, then stay with me. The next tale is already waiting to be told.